Hey guys, tonight we step through a narrow arch into a world thick with the scent of cardamom, tobacco, and old wood. You blink against the glow of lanterns swinging from stained wooden beams. The floor beneath your sandals is padded with layered rugs worn soft by generations of slippered feet. There's laughter, a clack of game pieces, a soft hiss of coffee bubbling in a copper says. You've just entered an Ottoman Coffeehouse somewhere in Istanbul, or maybe Aleppo, or even Sarajevo, where nobody checks the time because sunrise tells them when to go home. A man nods at you from behind a low counter. He's stirring something, dark and ancient smelling, and he doesn't look up when he says, "Sit anywhere. First cup's always the strongest." There's a cat perched on a stool like it owns the place. You're not sure it doesn't. Around you, men of all ages sprawl on divans or sit hunched around tables, speaking in low voices or none at all. Everyone's waiting for something. A cup, a turn, a punchline dot, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere unexpected, drop your city and local time in the comments. It's always a joy to see how far this little storytelling caravan travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your robe tighter against the evening chill. Outside, the muezzin's last call fades into the night, but inside the coffeehouse, the night is just beginning. This isn't a place of quick stops. It's a slow unspooling of games and gossip, songs and stories. In the Ottoman Empire, these spaces weren't just about coffee. They were theaters, debate halls, and sometimes unofficial courts of law. You sink onto a cushion beside a low, brass-trimmed table. The lacquer has peeled from too many spills, and someone's etched a mangala board into the wood. Your host returns with a steaming demitasse, sets it down with no fanfare, and vanishes again. The first sip hits like a velvet hammer bitter. Sweet, thick enough to chew. There's no menu. The only thing served here, besides coffee and maybe dates, is company. This is a place for the old and the bored, the young and the clever, the poets and the petty criminals. Here, all are leveled by the grounds in their cup. Historians still argue whether these coffee houses were dens of subversion or just Ottoman versions of Cheers. Maybe both. Across from you, a man unrolls a scroll with exaggerated care. You expect scripture, but it's a list of last week's tabla winners. Backgammon champions are taken seriously here. Reputation clings to the walls like the ever-present. Smoke, there's no rush. Conversations stretch out like embroidery threads. You catch snippets in Turkish, Arabic, Armenian languages overlap like the rugs beneath your feet. Someone's retelling a joke about a vizier and a goat. Another group debates whether the moon looks more like a plate or a pomegranate. A lute strums from the corner, not a performance, just idle fingers making idle beauty. You reach for a cube of sugar, but pause. Some say the best way to taste Ottoman coffee is unsweetened, letting the bitterness bite, then bloom. You sip again. There's sediment at the bottom, thick as wet clay. If someone reads your fortune in it later, don't. Be surprised. A young boy scurries through with a tray of empty cups stacked like a tower. No one acknowledges him. That's his power. He sees everything. Carries news faster than any letter. Behind you, a curtain stirs, and two men emerge, robes trailing, eyes glassy. One of them's grinning. He just won 3 games of mangala and a small silver ring. You'll hear that story 2 more times tonight, told a little differently each time. And yet, this place is comfortable. Not cozy, but familiar in a way you didn't expect. Like you've been coming here for years. Your shoulders loosen. Your breath slows. The stories and laughter wash over you like soft rain on old stone. you notice something scrawled on the wall beside the chess table. Faded ink in Arabic script. You squint. It says, "This is not where time is kept. It's where it's forgotten." You smile. That sounds about right out somewhere behind you. A deep voice begins to chant a tale about a sultan and a dancing donkey. No one laughs yet. They're waiting for the twist. There's always a twist. You lean back, cup in hand, and exhale. Welcome to the night. You probably won't survive this, but only because nobody leaves before sunrise. A soft clatter draws your gaze to the nearest table. Two men sit cross-legged, the board between them heavy with inlaid mother-of-pearl and gold filigree. Their fingers hover over the smooth, worn discs of backgammon tavla, as it's called. Here, it's more than a game. It's war without casualties, flirtation with dice, philosophy disguised as luck. One man clicks his tongue and moves his piece. The other sighs like the move physically wounded him. You don't know the rules exactly, but you don't need to. The energy crackling between them is universal. The joy of a lucky roll, the heartbreak of a miscalculation, the slow unraveling of pride. You nurse your coffee and watch. Time slows to a syrupy crawl. The lamps flicker with the occasional breeze from the open door, where cats come and go like minor nobility. Your neighbor leans in, murmuring the names of the players like they're generals. That one's Yusuf, the tailor, used to cheat until he got caught with loaded dice. The other's Simo. He prays between rounds, says it resets his karma. In a corner, 4 men lean over a mangala board, an ancient game with roots deeper than the empire itself. They play in silence, eyes darting between bowls hollowed into the wood. Every drop of a seed is a choice. Every movement, a message. Historians still argue whether mangala arrived from Persia, or if it wandered in from Africa like a tired camel. Either way, it's found a permanent home here. You pick up a round, yellowed seed and roll it between your fingers. It's heavier than you expect, cool and smooth, like time itself. One man gestures you over. "First game's free," he says. "But if you lose, you owe me a poem." And that's the thing, games here aren't just entertainment. They're currency. They buy you respect or insults or a long, meandering tale about someone's cousin who once beat the Grand Vizier at chess. You nod and decline politely, but he grins anyway. Next round, then. In another corner, a man with a walrus mustache and a voice like gravel bellows the rules of a game that sounds suspiciously made up. You have to guess the number of beans in the jar. Closest gets the seat of honor. There is no jar. People laugh. That's the point. A passing server refills your cup without asking. This one's thicker, darker. You can feel your pulse match its rhythm. Someone plucks at a kanan, a stringed instrument with notes like honey melting on the tongue. The coffeehouse vibrates with layers, game upon game, conversation upon song, breath upon memory. Someone slams their hand on the table. A cry of victory. The tavla game ends in dramatic fashion. Yusuf the tailor raises his arms. Simul just shakes his head and smiles, no hard feelings. This is ritual. A boy runs in, panting, a folded paper in his hand. A message? A bet? No one stops him. He skids to a halt beside the mangala players and whispers in a man's ear. The man rises, nods once, and disappears out the back. No explanation. No surprise that you begin to realize how many games are played here without boards. A man whispering. Sweet nothings to the lute player is playing for love. The old poet reciting rhymes by heart is playing for relevance. The merchant bragging about his daughter's dowry is playing for status. You close your eyes and listen. Dice roll like distant thunder. Chess pieces slide with a whisper. Seeds clink in their wooden nests. Laughter erupts, then dies. The room breathes. So do you. There's a story someone tells about a man who played a single game of chess for 8 nights straight. His opponent died of boredom halfway through, but his ghost finished the match. People still debate who won. The lesson? Patience is not just a virtue, it's a tactic. One of the regulars nearby raises an eyebrow and offers a riddle. What has no mouth, but tells no lies? What has no clock, but never runs out of time? You blink. Coffee, you guess? He laughs. Close this room. You laugh too. He's not wrong. The man with the walrus mustache returns, now holding an actual jar of beans. He slaps it on the table triumphantly. You doubted me, he says. Now guess or leave in shame. You play along. 52? 78? Nobody checks. He just hands the jar to a new victim. Game resets. Through the window, you glimpse the sky. Black velvet, pricked with silver. No stars move. That's because in this coffee house, time has curled in on itself. A warm loop of games, stories, and laughter. Remember the boy with the tray earlier? He now sits on a cushion, playing dominoes. With a bearded man, the roles shift like smoke. Everyone plays. Everyone listens. Everyone waits their turn. Another man approaches with a deck of thick, greasy cards. He fans them out, asks if you want your fate read. You shake your head. Suit yourself, he shrugs. But your luck smells like cinnamon tonight. You wonder, was that a compliment? A warning? A poetic aside? It doesn't matter. In the Ottoman Coffeehouse, clarity is not the point. Mystery, however, now that's the real game. Someone claps twice, sharp and deliberate. A rustling hush follows, like the shifting of pages in an unseen book. Heads turn toward the small platform in the corner, a dais worn smooth by countless feet, prayers, and performances. A storyteller is about to begin. You're barely done sipping your coffee when the air thickens with anticipation. The man on the platform adjusts his sash, clears his throat, and begins not with a greeting, but with a roar of drama. And so, on the 79th night of the Caliph's dream, it's a meta-public storyteller, performer, and sometimes political whisperer. His voice dips and swells like an oud string, each syllable sticky with age-old cadence. You find yourself leaning forward, though you didn't mean to. The story is strange. Something about a wandering dervish, a magical pigeon, and a vizier who cannot sleep unless he's read a new proverb. But the meta doesn't just recite, he acts. He stomps, weeps, laughs, and even whistles. His headscarf becomes a veil, a turban, a lost cat, depending on the character. A spoon from his belt transforms into a scepter, a dagger, or a lover's comb. A few younger listeners giggle. The old ones nod. This story's been told 1,000 times, but that's the point. You're not here for the surprise. You're here for how he tells it. Tonight, the meta chooses a cheeky tone. Tomorrow, it might be tragic. It's the same tale, but never quite the same. One man shouts, "Skip to the pigeon part," and everyone groans. The meta smiles wickedly, pauses, and launches into a side story about a market thief who stole a handful of almonds and was sentenced to eat them all without blinking. Nobody minds. Tangents are flavor. It's easy to forget. Now, how subversive. This all used to be. Historians still argue whether Ottoman sultans feared coffeehouses more for their caffeine or their content. These were not just places of games and gossip. They were underground forums. Wrapped in cinnamon and steam, the meta might tell of foolish kings or wise beggars, but anyone paying attention could find modern echoes. A tale of a corrupt vizier might, with the right audience, be a jab at a local official. A romantic parable could double as a coded message. Listeners knew how to listen. The coffeehouse hums in appreciation as the meta mimics the faltering pigeon's voice. Coup. Coup. I bring prophecy, but forgot the words. The room erupts in laughter. He lets the mirth settle before moving on. You look around. No one checks the time. No one cares. Even the cats have paused to watch. One of them sits at the base of the platform, tail curled like a question mark, eyes narrowed in dramatic judgment. It strikes you that this too is a game storytelling. The meta plays with your attention, daring you to fall asleep or lose the thread. You play along, trying to guess the next turn. The real prize isn't the ending. It's the feeling that you are part of something ancient and living. Across the room, a skeptical youth rolls his eyes. He's heard the story before, probably thinks it's outdated, but halfway through, his head begins to tilt. A smirk creeps in. He's lost the battle. The meta always wins. It said some storytellers used to carry licenses in their belt's official permission to entertain. Others roamed the empire without papers, relying on charm and memory. One even claimed to be illiterate, boasting that only fools need paper when their heart is a library. That might have been a lie, but it was a good one. The meta reaches the climax. The vizier finally sleeps. The pigeon turns into a book. The dervish disappears into steam. Applause not thunderous, just respectful fills the room. The meta bows low. He walks off with no fanfare, already fading into the background. Like a memory you almost dreamed got in his wake, murmurs rise. Some debate the meaning. Others retell their favorite parts, exaggerating for flair. One man insists the story was originally about a fox, not a pigeon. You're thinking of the fox who married a candle. Another replies, you don't ask. For clarification, a napkin sketch appears on your table, someone's doodle of the dervish mid-dance. Was it meant for you? A joke? A flirtation? It's unsigned. You keep it anyway, somewhere near the back. A group begins preparing for a shadow play. You can't see them clearly, but you recognize the shapes wooden cutouts of Karags and Hasivat, two characters from another beloved tradition. They'll argue, trick, tease, and occasionally punch each other in silhouette. It's crass, ridiculous, and beloved by scholars and children alike. They say sultans once invited these shadow puppeteers to court. Others claim they were banned for political mockery. Historians still argue whether the banning was real or just another dramatic myth. You suspect both are true. It always works that way. Here the lanterns dim slightly. Smoke curls from a hookah. Someone whispers a poem, and someone else responds with the next line. The coffee cools, but the night warms. Words dance across tables. Eyes flicker with shared references. A man leans toward you and asks deadpan, do you believe pigeons can dream? You answer honestly, tonight I do. The meta reappears by the bar, sipping soup from a wooden bowl. No applause, no spotlight. Just another player, waiting for the next turn. You can't quite say when the games begin. There's no bell or announcement. It's more like a tide-shifting conversation quiets in some corners and grows sharper in others. A few regulars rearrange low tables, sweeping aside cups and crumbs. A man returns from the back, carefully balancing a worn wooden box. The lid slides open, revealing rows of polished game pieces, each one carved, not quite identical, each one clearly loved. Tonight, it's mangala. You'd recognize the rhythm anywhere. 2 players, 16 pits, and a trail of clicking seeds that clatter like dice, but move with almost ritual grace. One man scoops, drops, skips. His opponent watches without blinking. The rest of the room tunes in and out, half spectators, half future challengers. Mangala has rules. Sure, but half the game is psychological. You fake confidence. You feign hesitation. You pretend you've miscounted when really you're 4 moves ahead. It's chess without a board, poker without cards, One old man leans forward and mutters. He's playing the crescent pattern. The woman next to him snorts. That's not a real strategy. He replies, neither is yours, and yet you keep losing. You grin. This is not just fun, it's a language. Historians trace mangala to Africa, ancient Egypt, maybe even Mesopotamia. Versions of it exist from the Philippines to Nigeria. But here, in the heart of an Ottoman coffeehouse, it becomes something more. A local tournament, a communal meditation, a way to pass time until the call to prayer or sunrise, whichever comes first. You watch as seeds slip from hand to hand, pit to pit, a cascade of choices. Sometimes the players pause to sip tea, exchange insults, or swap life updates mid-game. One is getting married. Another just bought a goat. Someone claims their cousin saw a djinn in the bathhouse. Everyone laughs, but not too hard. Just in case. And while mangala might be the star tonight, it's not alone. In another corner, 3 women huddle over a backgammon board. Their laughter stings, sharp and victorious. One slaps her hand on the table, announcing her win with theatrical flourish. The loser accuses her of bribing the dice. The dice, smug and silent, refuse comment. Backgammon, known here as tavla, is older than the empire itself. They say even Roman soldiers rolled its dice. But in this cafe, it feels perfectly Ottoman, elegant, ancient, and cutthroat. You're told some tavla players go their whole lives undefeated, but that might just be tavla legend. Still, the pride in each role is unmistakable. And then there's chess. A quieter table hosts 2 men in serious robes, serious beards, and seriously terrifying poker faces. Their board is large, well-oiled. The pieces are ornate, an army in miniature. One rook bears a dent. A bishop is missing a base and replaced with a coin. No one minds. It's the brain that matters. Their match unfolds like a slow-burn novel. No drama, just deliberate moves, long pauses, and the occasional eye-narrowed nod. You notice one player adjusting his turban when nervous. The other hums tunelessly when thinking. Across 5 minutes, only 2 pieces move. Still, no one looks away. Chess has never just been a game here. In the Ottoman world, it was training for life. Strategy, patience, foresight, adaptation. A sultan's advisor once said, "You may lose a queen in play, but save an empire in thought." That same advisor also once lost 6 matches in a row and threw the board into the Bosphorus. People contain multitudes dot between games. Someone begins juggling apricots. Don't ask why, it just happens. He fumbles the 3rd toss, and a cat catches. The fruit with unexpected elegance. Everyone claps. The cat bows. Over time, even your own fingers itch to join. Someone teaches you a quick dice game that involves shouting numbers and slapping the table. You're terrible at it, but no one minds. Another game appears that involves drawing zigzags in spilled coffee grounds. You lose track of the rules. Or maybe there never were any. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans formalized these games or simply embraced what wandered in. Many of these pastimes existed long before Istanbul was even called that. But coffeehouses gave them a permanent home. Here, time isn't measured in hours. It's counted in moves, rolls, and checkmates. A teenager challenges the tabla queen and is promptly obliterated. His friends jeer supportively. The meta from earlier wanders by, critiques someone's chess opening, then steals a mangala piece and pockets it with a wink. A muttered curse follows him. Through it all, coffee flows. Cups are refilled silently, as if the drink itself is a character in the room. You lose count of how many you've had. The caffeine is not a stimulant now, it's a soundtrack. And still, the night continues. No one checks the hour. That would break the spell. Time here bends anyway. It pools in laughter, skips ahead in strategy, freezes during tight matches. and spirals back when someone retells an old game's glorious finale from years ago. There's always someone who insists, "You should have seen the move he pulled in, 87. You don't ask if they mean 1987 or 1487. There's a new game being taught at the next table paper. Pen, folded corners, flicked fingers. A blend of chance and geometry. A girl wins the round and sticks out her tongue. You remember being that. Age, somewhere else. Learning games under different lanterns. Some things don't change. And why should they? Games are memory in motion. Tactics wrapped in laughter. Culture in disguise. You lean back, dizzy not from drink, but from the warmth of it all. The swirl of light. The echoes of the dice. The absurdity of losing to someone whose strategy is roll fast and hope. Someone next to you asks, "Your turn?" You smile and answer, "Always." The games may be the heart, but the soul of the Ottoman Coffeehouse is in the stories whispered between rounds. As you settle deeper into your corner, warm from caffeine and crowded conversation, you notice a shift in tone around you. The noise dims, not by volume, but by texture. The players now lean closer, their eyes dart toward the door and back to their cups. No one gets up, but suddenly everyone's ears are tuned to a new frequency. This is the hour of secrets. You hear one first, from a man with an impeccably curled mustache. He speaks low, one hand cupping his cheek like a visor. His friend nods, then interrupts with a counter-whisper. The first man groans. It seems the secret has already made the rounds. Tonight's gossip? A local official allegedly caught napping. During prayers. Scandalous? Mildly. But it's not the details that matter. It's the thrill of sharing them. Even trivial tales carry weight in a room like this, and their power grows with each retelling. You've barely arrived, and already you know that the butcher's son got into poetry. The baker's daughter turned down a scribe, and someone's donkey has been missing for 2 days. Last seen near the spice market, probably trying to start a new life. This is what the Ottomans called dedi kodu, literally, said, but more poetically, whisper echo, gossip, and in coffee houses it thrived. These places weren't just hubs of leisure. They were nerve centers, pumping social information like blood through the empire's veins. Historians agree. Few institutions captured the pulse of the street like the coffeehouse. Travelers could learn a city's political climate from its chessboard chatter. Merchants discovered shifts in tariffs through tavla smack talk. Soldiers learned who was hiring just by listening during tea refills. But others weren't so fond of this informal intelligence network. You might be surprised to learn that Ottoman rulers, some of them, at least, were deeply suspicious of these places. Imagine trying to run a vast empire while knowing that in every city, men were sitting around, drinking strong brews, and discussing whether your latest tax was nonsense, which it usually was. So yes, coffee houses were monitored from time to time. Imperial edicts would ban them outright. Guards would arrive, chase out the patrons, shut down the ovens. One sultan even sent spies disguised as storytellers to eavesdrop on dissent. Another supposedly wore a false beard and went incognito, hoping to catch grumblers in the act. But like trying to forbid yawning, these bans never lasted long. You could almost hear the sultan's advisors grumbling. "We told you. Your Majesty, I'll just meet in the bathhouse instead." And so the cycle repeated. Crackdowns followed by resurgences. Arrests followed by louder laughter, stronger coffee, and spicier stories. Some patrons got clever. They'd invent fake scandals just to confuse spies. Others held silent games, nights to foil eavesdroppers. You overhear one elder recall a time he and his friends spent 3 hours pretending to be mute, just to throw off a government informant. The result? A full night of charades and one very confused janissary. But it wasn't all jokes. The whispers often turned to real resistance. Coffeehouses helped circulate banned poetry, outlawed pamphlets, and bold political jokes with teeth, sharp enough to get you flogged. Think of it as the Twitter of the 17th century, only smellier, with more sugar cubes. Still, most evenings, like this one, stayed peaceful. The stories shared here are more social than seditious. A traveling dervish once claimed he saw a man ride a horse across the Sea of Marmara. Another swears by the ghost in the lamp over Table 7. Someone else insists the cat who lives behind the stove is a reincarnated poet who only meows in meter. No one believes him except the cat, who seems quite flattered. There's one story, though, that returns more than once tonight. The tale of the coffeehouse fire. It happened years ago. A man knocked over a brazier while arguing about dice. Flames leapt to the ceiling. Patrons screamed. The meta dropped his loot and ran. But then, according to legend, a stranger calmly poured his cup of coffee on the flame and extinguished it in one magical splash. No one saw where he went. The next day, all the brass pots were polished. No soot anywhere. Angel? Someone suggests. Probably just an overachieving janitor. Another replies. You listen, amused. It's not the truth of the tale that matters. It's the ritual of retelling. These shared memories, half real and half dreamed, are the true currency of the coffeehouse. You trade them like coins, sometimes polishing them with each exchange, sometimes letting them tarnish for effect. And always, always, you whisper. The way a sentence is lowered, just a breath too much. The way a glance toward the doorway turns. An ordinary story into espionage. You begin to feel like every table is its own newsroom, publishing editions with each refill. You imagine tiny headlines floating over the tables. Mustache man's niece moving to Syria, what this means for pigeon racing. Sugar shortage linked to over-flirting in the bazaar. Sources claim. Local prince loses tabla to fishmonger. Empire. Unravels? Quirky? Absolutely. But behind the humor is something serious. In a world where news traveled by foot, by scroll, or by luck, gossip was often the most reliable courier. And yet, there's a quiet dignity to this information exchange. Not every whisper is silly. Some carry grief. A neighbor fallen ill. A family displaced by a flood. A traveler who never returned. When these stories are shared, the coffee cools untouched, and even the dice rest still. There's something sacred about how people hold space for each other here. A whole social fabric being woven with every hushed sentence. Your presence here, however temporary, is now stitched into that fabric. You've been part of a dozen microdramas tonight. You've nodded at jokes you barely understood, laughed at insults you didn't deserve, sipped coffee brewed in kettles older than your great-grandparents, and you've whispered about a man you'll probably never meet, but whom you now feel strangely connected to, because stories like games outlast us all. By now, the caffeine is mingling with your blood like a slightly too eager dinner guest, and the hum of conversation around you has taken on a low, melodic rhythm. Your eyes flicker across the room, and it's clear the games have become more serious. You've stumbled into the tavla hour. Backgammon, called tavla in Ottoman times, isn't just a game here. It's an institution. The sound alone is unmistakable. That dry clack of dice against the wooden board, the scrape of checkers. Sliding like miniature siege towers, across a grid of chance and calculation. You settle into a spot where you can observe a match. No fanfare, no announcer. Just two men, one with a beard so white it practically glows, the other with a look of eternal sleep deprivation, locked in silent combat, broken only by the occasional grunt, click, or muttered Ottoman curse word. May your donkey forget your face is a personal favorite. Tavla has roots that stretch back over 5,000 years, but the Ottomans gave it new life. Played in smoky coffeehouses, in soldiers' barracks, on palace verandas, and even inside bathhouses, where damp fingers made it maddening. The game became a quiet obsession. It's easy to learn, hard to master, and somehow always personal. Tonight, your players have fallen into a rhythm that borders on hypnotic. The younger man rolls, swears under his breath, moves his pieces with the slow agony of someone choosing their own execution order. The older man just smiles. His roll lands perfectly, and two of his checkers sweep onto their final quadrant like they knew the path before they started. You glance at the board again, trying to follow. The layout looks simple, just 24 triangles, some checkers, and 2 dice. But to an Ottoman mind, this board was a map of fate. Every move was a metaphor. Checkers exiled and returned. Fortresses built and broken. It was a game of empire in miniature. You imagine janissaries once using it to simulate sieges. Scholars using it to prove celestial balance. Bakers using it to delay going home to 6 screaming kids. And of course, gossipers using it as cover for far more dangerous conversations. Here's a lesser-known historical tidbit. In the 17th century, some Ottoman clerics tried to ban tavla. They called it a distraction for religious duties, a game of dice, which could tempt fate too boldly. One religious scholar even argued it could alter a man's temperament permanently, to which one coffeehouse patron allegedly replied, "Yes, and usually for the better." Historians still argue whether those bans were ever actually enforced. Some edicts were posted, sure, but enforcement in a smoke-filled room with 30 opinionated old men and 1 communal cat was inconsistent at best. Plus, everyone cheated. That's the other layer to this game, the theatrical mischief. There are rules, yes, but also rules, the ones known only to that specific coffeehouse. Like, if you spill your coffee on the dice, you lose a turn. Or, rolling doubles 3 times in a row means the house cat gets to sit on the board. No one writes these rules down. They live and die in laughter, eye rolls, and tradition. In fact, it's said that some old coffeehouses had house dice, a slightly weighted, set reserved for regulars with arthritis and fragile egos. Others had secret hand signals to warn a friend of a bad move without alerting their opponent. One legendary tavla club in Istanbul used to rotate the board 180 degrees, mid-game, just to see what the pieces would do in a different mood. But the most sacred part? The trash talk. You hear it now as the older man rolls a perfect 6-5 combo and begins to bear off his final checkers. He looks up at his opponent with that half smirk only the deeply retired can master. "Your luck," he murmurs, has all the grace of a wet shoe. The younger man sighs, but smiles. "You talk like you invented the game." "I did. Twice. Forgot it both times." The match ends with a gentle thud and a handshake that somehow communicates. 3 insults and 1 fatherly blessing. A new pair sits down, already arguing about starting positions. The cycle continues. You lean back, letting the game's rhythm wash over you. It's no longer just about the moves. It's about memory. This game has absorbed the fingerprints of generations. The boards are stained with decades of spilled tea, burned tobacco, and nervous sweat. Every dent in the wood tells a story, some of triumph, some of defeat, some of very enthusiastic gesturing. In one corner, you spot a child watching 2 elders play. He's not playing yet, he's learning, silently counting the pips on the dice, watching when players hesitate, noticing which moves cause laughter and which cause cursing. This, too, is a game, a test of patience. His initiation. By the way, did you know that Ottoman coffeehouses sometimes hosted tavla tournaments that lasted all night? We're talking 12-hour marathons. No prize, no trophy, just glory, coffee, and a neck cramp that lasts 3 days. The longest known match reportedly ended at sunrise, when one player fell asleep mid-roll and accidentally won by drooling on the board. He's now a legend. But Tavla wasn't the only game around. You'll soon discover others. Mangala, a kind of ancient Turkish mangala. Card games with names like 41 and Liar's Palace. And even mock trials where players argued ridiculous fake cases for hours on end, judged by a drunk potter and a cat with seniority. Games were a way to pass time, yes, but also to build identity, forge friendship, and sharpen wits. They were a mirror, reflecting both the seriousness and absurdity of life under the crescent moon. And as the coffee steams and the dice roll again, you feel it. You are inside a moment that has happened before, a moment that will happen again. You could come back in a century and still find two people sitting across a battered board, trying to outplay fate one roll at a time. The game never ends. It just changes players. The coffeehouse quiets for a moment, not because the games have stopped, but because a man at the far end of the room has stood up and cleared his throat. There's a pause, then a ripple of recognition. He's the Haisia Chi, the storyteller. And just like that, another layer of the night begins. You lean in, not sure what you're about to hear. A fable? A joke? A bit of history made absurd? The answer is yes, and no, and everything in between. He begins, his voice gravelly and slow, like gravel being poured into silk. There once was a sultan who loved his slippers more than his wife. And just like that, the crowd snickers and the story unfolds. Welcome to Verbal Games, the unscripted theater of the Ottoman Coffeehouse, where words were weapons, riddles, were tests of honor, and silence was a strategic disadvantage. This wasn't idle chatter. These performances were a competitive art form. Part one-upmanship, part improvisation, part folk memory. There was even a structured tradition for these performances. Mukadam, the opening, Faisal, the story body, and Hatam, the resolution or punchline. And don't think you can get away with a weak Hatam. A story without a satisfying ending would earn you slow claps and thrown pistachio shells. And then, of course, came the word duels. You're still not quite sure how they work, but suddenly two men are standing, volleying rhymed couplets at each other like it's poetry dodgeball. One of them insults the other's beard, using a metaphor about a burned broom. The other fires back with a line that somehow includes the moon, a donkey, and tax policy. The crowd gasps. Someone mutters, "He went there." This tradition, known as atisma, was half poetry battle, half mental fencing. Think rap battles, but in robes and slippers, with the occasional reference to a 12th century theologian. You either delivered wit on command, or you risked social exile or worse, a pity round of applause. And here's a fringe fact. Some coffeehouses hired professional retort artists. These guys were paid not to tell stories, but to interrupt. Them strategically, hilariously, and with such timing that even the Haikaichi had to applaud. Historians still argue whether these performers were trained, self-taught, or just naturally annoying. But storytelling wasn't only for the literate. Elite. The coffeehouse was the great leveler. Merchants, porters, and scholars alike all gathered to spin tailies. A donkey driver could silence a room with a ghost story. A former janissary could make people weep with a war memory reimagined as epic poetry. And a baker might recount a dream so vivid and weird that it accidentally sparked a theological debate. There were even recurring characters, unofficial mascots of the oral tradition. One of the most beloved was Nasreddin Hoya, the wise fool. Of Anatolian folklore, every story about him involves absurd logic, selling wisdom in sacks, riding donkeys backward, or charging neighbors for smelling his cooking. He's part Socrates, part trickster god, part guy dash you dash, wish dash WASN single quotes T dash and dash or dash, group dash chat. You hear his name mentioned in tonight's performance. And the Hoya says, if your cow can't read, why give it the Quran? Laughter erupts out of course. Some stories weren't meant to amuse. Some were riddles, and in Ottoman coffeehouses, riddles were more than brain teasers. They were tests of intelligence, wit, and occasionally, your right to stay in the conversation. You overhear one now, tossed casually between two players, as they wait for a game board. I speak without a tongue, fly without wings, and die every time you open your eyes. What am I? Pause, and the reply. A dream. Correct. The winner nods solemnly, as if he's just recited a treaty. This kind of intellectual sparring was the lifeblood of the coffeehouse. One traveler in the 18th century described these places as universities for the unlettered, where men without formal education sharpened their minds through dialogue, performance, and the occasional shouting match over how to pronounce Bayezid. And here's the thing, some of those heated debates were more than just for show. The coffeehouse was often the informal parliament of the street. Men gathered to discuss new taxes, rumors of war, the latest decrees from the palace. And because no one wanted to get arrested for treason, many of these conversations were disguised as jokes. So when a storyteller says, the lion taxed all the animals but forgot the crocodile, who lived in a palace with no doors, you can bet someone in the audience is nodding, whispering, that's totally about the Grand Vizier. This coded language became its own genre. Subversive storytelling, mocking the powerful under the veil of parable. It was witty, it was dangerous, and it was oddly soothing. You sip your coffee and imagine being an 18th century Ottoman sultan, secretly disguised, sneaking into a coffeehouse to see what your people really think of you. You'd get insulted, praised, misquoted, and turned into a rhyming couplet about goats. And you'd love it. By now, the Haikaichi is winding down. He circles back to his opening, a classic move looping the slipper-loving sultan into a surprise twist that also includes a pigeon, a mirror, and a moral lesson that might be about marriage, or might be about pastry. Applause breaks out gentle. Respectful. He bows, accepts a cup of sweetened coffee, and returns to his seat. The dueling poets resume their tavla game. Someone else begins a slow beat on his ceramic cup, tapping out a rhythm for no one in particular. You feel it again, that sense of immersion, of drifting between story and reality, past and present. These games of words weren't just entertainment. They were how people thought out loud, how they remembered, how they dreamed while wide awake. The air smells of roasted beans, warm bodies, and a hint of rain on distant cobblestones. Outside, the night thickens. Inside, the tales continue. Your eyes drift toward a group in the corner, seated in a tight circle around a low wooden table. Their coffee cups are nearly empty, but they're not moving. Why? Because the game they're playing might last until dawn, and that's not an exaggeration. Welcome to the realm of eternal strategy, the long-form games of the Ottoman Coffeehouse, built not for speed, but for psychological endurance. One of the men leans in, fingers twitching over a grid of hand-carved wooden tiles. Another murmurs, something under his breath. The tension builds not over a sword fight, but over whether someone's bluff just got called. This, you quickly learn, is mangala, an ancient game of seeds and pits, and a favorite across centuries of empires. You try to follow the rules, but it's like watching someone knit upside down. Pieces move in circles, piles vanish, counters get redistributed, and somehow strategy lives in the pattern. It's part math, part misdirection, and deeply meditative. Here's the mainstream fact. Mangala are games like it dates back over 1,300 years, with archaeological versions found in Africa, the Middle East, and even Viking sites. The Ottoman version? A coffeehouse staple, especially during the long, slow nights of Ramadan. The fringe tidbit? Some mangala boards were inscribed with poetry. Not rules, not grids poetry. Verses that changed depending on the owner. One board found in Bursa had a ghazal about fate carved into the center, as if to say, "You don't play this game. You? Surrender to it." Mangala wasn't the only game with staying power. Take Tavla Yes, the game you now know as backgammon. It was as common as sugar, and just as addictive. Two men slapped the dice down with satisfying force. The game is fast, but the rivalry is long-term. You sense that tonight's match is only the latest in a multi-decade saga. The winner gets a free pastry. The loser must recite a love poem aloud, and that poem had better be in meter. Tavla was all about balance, chance, and skill, risk, and restraint. Ottoman men played it obsessively. Some coffeehouses had in-house champions. Others banned it during certain hours to avoid loud dice during Quran recitations. Historians still argue whether Tavla was ever officially taxed or prohibited, especially during conservative reigns. Some say yes, others claim no's. Bans were symbolic, much like modern curfews that no one enforces. You wander to another table, drawn by the clatter of dominoes. But these aren't just standard issue blocks. Each tile is ornately painted gold-edged dots, tiny floral motifs, even one with a tulip where a number should be. These sets were often custom-made. Wealthier patrons would have their own game. Sets delivered to the coffeehouse ahead of their arrival. You couldn't just be good at games. You had to be stylishly competitive. What's remarkable is how patient the players are. No one's checking a watch. No one's refreshing a feed. The rhythm is unhurried, like they're savoring the experience the way one might savor a strong, gritty cup of Turkish brew slowly, with reverence, knowing the grounds will settle eventually. It's worth noting, time moved differently in these spaces. Coffee houses often stayed open well past midnight. During certain festivals or holy nights, some ran continuously for days, with the same game winding on in shifts, like a strategic relay race. There's even an anecdote half historical, half myth that two chess masters once played for 3 nights straight, taking breaks only to pray and sip coffee. They had a scribe record each move by candlelight. No one remembers who won, but the notes became a kind of literary artifact, published as the game of endless patience. You pause to admire a chessboard now. The pieces are worn, but dignified like actors returning for a final performance. 2 young boys are watching an elder play himself, moving white, then black, murmuring lines like a poet composing verses. It's not about winning, he says to no one in particular. It's about listening to the board. And it's true. These games weren't about bragging rights. They were about ritual, a structure for conversation, a way to test your memory, your insight, your ability to stay calm when your opponent quotes Rumi while stealing your best piece. You overhear snippets. You opened with the bird gambit again? That's not a gambit, it's an apology. Why apologize? I brought sweets. It hits you. This isn't just socializing. This is intellectual intimacy. These men aren't competing to dominate. They're competing to connect, to impress, to weave a shared evening that'll live longer than any checkmate. One player turns over a card. Yes, cards. The Ottomans didn't invent them, but they made them theirs. Decks were decorated with Persian miniatures, Ottoman calligraphy, and even imperial symbols, depending on the era. Most common, the game of pisti, a kind of slap-and-match game that sounds simple, but requires a gambler's heart and a monk's memory. And just when you think you've seen it all, someone brings out a goose board. Yes, goose. It's a spiral game involving dice, landing on illustrated tiles like well, bridge, or death. It's a European import, yes, but adapted with Ottoman themes. The bathhouse square might grant extra turns. The vizier. Lets you leap ahead. No one plays it seriously. It's a warm-down game for those who've already played too much mangala to stand. You sit back and breathe it in. The quiet swish of sleeves over game boards. The clink of ceramic cups. The occasional snore from someone who leaned too far into a cushion and lost track of time. These weren't just games. They were hours, entire nights, and sometimes lifetimes. Played, replayed, remembered, and retold. And somewhere in the corner, a man moves a single seed in mangala and sighs. The coffeehouse air now carries a heavier scent, less of brewing beans and more of candle wax. Oil from game pieces, the fading perfumes of guests who've stayed too long. You stretch your legs. No one notices. Everyone here is busy talking. And not just small talk. You wander to a nearby group, sitting on cushions, men with ink-stained fingers, wrinkled vests, and minds running faster than any dice game. This isn't chess. This is argument, wrapped in metaphor, fueled by caffeine, and sharpened by pride. Ottoman coffeehouses weren't just playgrounds for the sleep-deprived. They were think tanks, rivaled only by mosques and madrasas in terms of intellectual energy. You overhear a man exclaim, "The stars do not command, they invite." His opponent responds, "Then why do my crops fail during Mars retrograde?" This isn't just astrology. It's theology, philosophy, and the politics of empire. All stirred into a single sentence? Mainstream fact? Ottoman coffeehouses, especially in cities like Istanbul, Damascus, and Cairo, were key forums for public discourse. News traveled fastest through storytellers and coffeehouse chatter, not official decrees. In fact, some coffeehouses became so influential that sultans sent spies to listen in. And the fringe detail? Some patrons brought their own chairs from home, actual labeled thrones or embroidered cushions, stored in the back by trusted keepers. Not out of ego, but because they planned to return to that exact seat every night for decades. You see this loyalty play out in the arguments. These aren't strangers fighting. These are familiar combatants, like old chess rivals, with entire histories embedded in their disagreements. One man interrupts another, not rudely, but because he's heard this rant 12 times before, and knows exactly how it ends. Debate in Ottoman coffeehouses was a verbal performance art. You didn't just state opinions. You recited, referenced, dramatized. You quoted poets like Fuzuli or philosophers like al-Ghazali, sometimes in the middle of insulting someone's logic. And if your delivery fell flat, someone would mock you with a sarcastic applause and offer a spoonful of sugar. For the bitterness of your point, they'd say. There was a culture of controlled confrontation. Even loud debates had rules. Interruptions were choreographed. Insults were often layered with wordplay so complex, the recipient might laugh. Before realizing they were being roasted, historians still argue whether this open discourse shaped any actual political outcomes or just served as intellectual entertainment. There are stories of tax riots sparked in coffeehouses, but it's unclear whether those were true catalysts or just convenient starting points in later legends. The conversation shifts now. Someone mentions a recent edict from the palace. The men lean in. They haven't read it. They've heard it from a traveler who heard it from a merchant who swears his cousin saw the seal. You realize that in an empire so vast and bureaucratic, information isn't broadcast. It's retold, reinterpreted, and respun in spaces like this. A coffeehouse is equal parts library and rumor mill. And here comes the poet. He doesn't walk so much as glide, carrying nothing but a folded paper fan and a leather satchel. Without permission, he takes a seat by the fire. Everyone shifts. Someone refills his cup. He starts speaking not loud, but clear, his words like silk unfurling in the dark. The poem he recites is political, but coded. A king with trembling hands, a vizier who hoards mirrors, a shepherd who refuses to shear his sheep. Every image is a metaphor, and every person listening is decoding it in real time. It's hypnotic and entirely improvised. Welcome to the spoken word poetry duel, Ottoman style. Think of it as rap battles meets Rumi. Two poets take turns weaving stanzas, trying to outwit, outheart, and outlast each other. One's weapon might be a clever turn of phrase. Another might drop a shocking historical reference that makes everyone hiss with admiration. These contests could last hours. Spectators would tip with coins, sweets, or applause. Winners weren't crowned. They were remembered, quoted for months afterward in coffeehouses across the district. The fringe detail? One famed poet in Aleppo reportedly used a live raven as his performance partner. It perched on his shoulder and cawed every time he mentioned death. No one knows whether the bird was trained or just had great timing. Another table, meanwhile, is playing a different kind of verbal game, riddle chains. Someone poses a complex puzzle. What has no tongue but speaks every truth, is always open yet never breaks. The answer? A letter. The next player has 60 seconds to come up with a riddle that either answers the previous one metaphorically or builds upon its concept. The goal isn't to stump, it's to impress. Wit is currency. The richer your imagination, the more people offer to buy your next coffee. There's a deep satisfaction here, not in being right, but in being heard. You see it in how they nod at each other, in how they pause between replies, choosing their next word like it's a pearl on a string. And if someone forgets themselves, raises a voice too loud, or insults. Without elegance, the coffeehouse keeper clears his throat, and everyone understands. There are unwritten rules, and breaking them brings silence faster than spilled coffee. The scholars are here too. Real ones, professors, judges, even retired scribes. They don't argue much. They listen, offer a phrase, maybe correct a date. Their value lies in restraint, not noise. You sit quietly, taking it all in. The blend of heat and intellect, ritual and rebellion. You expected stories, maybe music. But you didn't expect to hear the echoes of policy, literature, and folklore all braided into a single coffee-scented debate. Someone turns to you. What do you think about the stars? You blink. A moment ago, you were a listener. Now you're part of the chorus. You smile and say the only thing that feels true in this strange, flickering space. I think they're watching us argue and laughing. A hush begins to fall over the coffeehouse. Not silence, exactly, but a softening of tones, a rounding of edges. The laughter becomes lower, the debates more murmured, and the scraping of backgammon pieces against the table more rhythmic, less competitive. You lean into your cushion and notice the way time has slipped. Is it midnight? Is it 4 in the morning? You can't tell anymore. No one here bothers with clocks. Now. The performers take the stage, not actors with scripts, but wandering storytellers, called metas. You spot one in the corner, sitting on a low stool with a single candle casting enormous shadows on the wall behind him. He doesn't speak right away. He unwraps a bundle. Inside, a hat, a scarf, a stick, a piece of red cloth. Props, yes, but more than that, signals. He puts on the hat and becomes a soldier, twists the scarf and becomes a woman, grips the stick and becomes an old man. And then he begins. Hey guys, tonight Wait, no, that was earlier. Now you are inside the story. You're not just hearing it, you are transported by it. Mainstream historians agree. Metas were a key feature of Ottoman cultural life. They didn't just entertain, they preserved oral history. In a largely illiterate society, the meta was a living book, passing down legends, cautionary tales, and even political satire through carefully woven performances. They were licensed, regulated by guilds, and sometimes even censored. especially if their stories leaned too sharply into anti-sultanic critique. Tonight's story? The tale of Nasreddin Hoya, a figure so beloved, even scholars can't decide if he was a real man, a symbolic trickster, or a collective joke passed from village to village. You've probably heard a version of him, the man who rode his donkey backward, or who argued with a judge using logic so circular it made the audience dizzy. But here, in this dark, honey-smelling coffeehouse, the meta brings Nasreddin to life. The audience knows the punchlines, but laughs anyway. They nod along with the lessons, though they've heard them since childhood. It's not about surprise, it's about sharing something ancient together again and again. And here's the quirky detail. The meta doesn't use real voices for his characters. He mimics the way different regions pronounce certain letters. So the soldier speaks like someone from Edirne, while the greedy merchant has a nasal accent from Bursa. It's like if someone today did stand-up comedy in 5 dialects, and everyone in the room recognized everyone. Across the room, someone else rises. Not a meta, but a shadow puppeteer. You almost miss him. There's a small curtain, lit from behind, and suddenly, 2 shapes dance across it, Karags and Hasivet, the classic duo of Ottoman shadow play. You watch as they bicker, poke, and scheme. The story tonight is local. A corrupt tax collector, a marketplace scam, a marriage that almost didn't happen. Everyone chuckles at the jokes, gasps at the twists. Even the coffee server pauses to watch. This is satire disguised as slapstick. Historians still argue whether Karags was ever meant purely for children. The double entendres, political jabs, and complicated wordplay seem designed for adults, especially when you realize the Sultan himself reportedly had private shadow shows in the Topkapi Palace. As you watch, you realize how multi-layered the performance is. The puppeteer isn't just moving cutouts. He's using at least 4 different voices, performing the music and modulating sound effects with tiny drums and whistles, all from behind a curtain, unseen. It's a one-person orchestra. Blink, and the curtain is down. Everyone claps not wildly, but appreciatively. A few silver coins get passed to the puppeteer, who bows deeply and retreats behind a tapestry. The entertainment shifts again. This time, it's not a formal performance. It's just 2 old men at the far table, trading tall tales absurd, exaggerated, barely plausible stories from their youth. One claims to have wrestled a bear with one hand while holding a lantern in the other. The other insists he once cooked pilaf on a volcano. No one believes them, but no one wants them to stop. You smile, because you've heard versions of these stories in a dozen other languages. The coffeehouse lie is universal. An old man with a loud voice, a fantastical memory, and an audience of amused skeptics. A few guests get up, stretch, and say goodnight. But no one looks shocked at the hour. No one rushes. The night is meant to be long. Got another game starts in the corner. This time, a kind of poetic relay. Someone says a line soft, slow, something about the moon. The next person must respond with a line that matches in rhythm and ends with the same sound. It's like verbal jazz, improvised poetry with strict rhyme rules. If someone stumbles, they're out. If they soar, the whole room nods in rhythm. It's elegant, gentle, drowsy, even. And yet, in these games, these late-night acts of memory, mimicry, and meter, you begin to sense something profound. This coffeehouse is not just about pleasure. It's about preservation. The meta, the puppeteer, the riddle master, the poet, they are all oral archivists, preserving centuries of wit, wisdom, and warning in a form that requires listeners. Without ears, their craft dies, so they keep performing night after night until sunrise. A candle sputters. You realize most of the light now comes from the fireplace. Someone yawns. A few guests doze off on their cushions. But still, The soft echo of poetry, storytelling, and gentle clapping continues. And the real kicker? The coffeehouse doesn't close. Ever. There's no last call. No, we're shutting down. The games, the performances, the debate, they fade rather than stop. Like a lantern slowly dimming in a windless room dot. And as you lean back, lulled by shadow puppets and poetic whispers, you think, if insomnia had a patron saint, this place would be his chapel. The air in the coffeehouse changes subtly. It's not cooler or warmer, not exactly. Just heavier, like the atmosphere before dawn. The lamps burn lower, candles stub down into wax puddles. And though you're still surrounded by cushions, backgammon, boards, and the occasional clink of ceramic, a quiet lull is setting in. But sleep? That hasn't arrived. Not yet. You're in that mysterious Ottoman hour that exists between night and not quite morning, a liminal space. Half dream, half wakefulness. And that's exactly when the philosophers start talking dot at first. It seems like a whisper from 2 tables over. Then, with a shift in the silence, you catch more of it. Talk of the soul, the shape of the cosmos, whether virtue is a habit or a gift. You think you've wandered into a theology lecture. You haven't. This is manazara, a form of public disputation. Debate as both an art and a game. The Ottomans didn't invent it, but they elevated it to near coffeehouse sport. The object isn't to win, but to pursue a truth through verbal fencing. A man with a dark mustache leans forward, his voice soft but sure. If the universe is infinite, he says, then how can paradise have gates? His opponent raises an eyebrow, strokes his beard. Perhaps it has gates because our minds require edges, even if our souls do not. A few heads nod. A younger listener jots notes with a quill on folded parchment. You, meanwhile, pretend you're not eavesdropping, even though your ears are. Basically leaning in. Here's your mainstream fact. The Ottoman Empire housed a massive and diverse intellectual scene: poets, astronomers, legal scholars, mystics, and skeptics. While the Medrese schools were centers of formal education, coffeehouses were the places where people tested ideas. You didn't have to be certified. You just had to be interesting. Tonight's manazara includes a textile merchant, a Sufi dervish, and a man who may or may not be a retired janissary with opinions on Platonic forms. No one's sure. The debate drifts gently to dreams, what they mean, whether they come from angels or indigestion. A woman across the room, veil drawn back, offers a poem she wrote after dreaming of a talking fish. No one laughs. This isn't open mic night, it's dead serious. And here's the quirky bit. In some Ottoman cities, dream interpretation was an official occupation. There were people who made a living sitting in coffeehouses with a ledger of symbolic meanings. You'd pay a small coin, describe your dream, and they'd give you the likely cause divine message. Suppressed emotion, bad lentils, or all 3. Historians still argue whether these coffeehouse intellectuals shaped policy or merely passed the time. Some suggest their debates helped spread reformist ideas long before they reached the palace. Others say it was just smoke and storytelling. And you? You're somewhere in the middle. You find your thoughts slowing, but not dulling. More like stretching long, syrupy loops of philosophy and curiosity. Maybe the coffee is still in your system. Maybe the wisdom of 3 centuries is seeping into your bloodstream like low, thick steam got the philosopher's words meander now. One brings up the Mutakallimin, those early Islamic theologians who debated endlessly about divine attributes. Can Allah change his mind? He asks, and immediately follows it with, would he want to? The dervish shakes his head, eyes twinkling. Ask instead if he wants us to ask. No one claps. This isn't performance. It's ritual. Intellectual Sufi yoga dot in a dusty corner. Someone has a notebook open, sketching diagrams of star positions and calendar wheels. He's an amateur astrologer, trying to predict the future by mapping Venus's mood. You half expect him to shout, "Eureka!" But instead, he just mutters about retrogrades and flips the page. Then, just as your brain is about to float off into some velvet cosmos, you hear it music soft, distant, a reed flute. Nay, a sound like a sigh from the sky itself. You look toward the doorway, and there's a man standing there with the long, hollow instrument tilted gently to his lips. He plays without flourish, no theatrics, just a slow, unbroken tone that curls through the coffeehouse like breath, no beat. No words, just resonance. And yet, it holds the entire room captive. The ney is an ancient instrument, over 1,000 years old, and Ottoman musicians used it both in court music and Sufi ceremonies. That sighing sound? It was believed to mirror the ache of the soul, separated from its source. Like you, floating too far from bed, too deep into the night to turn back. There's a scholarly debate, of course, because we never go a section without. One about whether music like this was officially permitted in all corners of Ottoman society. Some religious authorities frowned on it, while others, especially in the Mevlevi Sufi orders, considered it essential for divine connection. Here in the coffeehouse, there's no divide. The flute plays, and everyone listens not as critics, not as fans, but as fellow humans brushing against something nameless. You lose track of time. That's okay. So does everyone else by now. Only a few guests remain awake. You glance toward the windows. The shutters are still drawn, but you notice a pale band of light leaking through a crack. The first hint of sunrise. The philosopher has gone quiet. The ney player sits down. And in this moment, the coffeehouse feels like a temple. Not just to caffeine and conversation, but to something more sacred. The art of unrushed thought, of staying awake, not out of duty, but out of awe. No one tells you to leave. There's no bell, no curfew. The night ends the way it began, gently, wordlessly, like a page turned by a breeze. And just as your eyelids begin to surrender, someone whispers a riddle. You never hear the answer. You don't remember falling asleep, but you wake or half-wake just as the room is changing again. Not sharply. The coffeehouse doesn't burst into morning with a rooster crow or a blinding shaft of sun through the latticework. No, it stirs, like an animal stretching under a blanket. A cup is set gently on a saucer. A window is open just a finger's width. Somewhere, someone hums under their breath, off-key and unbothered. You shift on your cushion. Your spine creaks. You're not sure if you've slept 20 minutes or 2 hours. There's a strange clarity in your mind, though, like someone wiped down the mirror of your thoughts with rose water and a silk cloth. The coffee pot is still warm. You sip reflexively. Somehow it tastes stronger, sharper than before. That's not surprising. You're now drinking the coffee of the survivors, the ones who've made it through the night without surrendering to sleep, still trading stories. Like gold coins as dawn licks the city's rooftops, there's an older man at the back table. You remember him from earlier, maybe the dice player with the lazy eye. He's now telling a story, the kind with too many plot twists and too many cousins. A few lean in, a few nod, pretending to follow. This is your mainstream historical fact. Oral storytelling was the heartbeat of the Ottoman Coffeehouse. Books existed, sure, and literacy was more widespread than in many contemporary empires. But stories, folk tales, historical epics, religious parables, gossip dressed up in metaphor, those were everyone's inheritance. One popular form was the meta performance, part storyteller, part impersonator, part magician. A good meta could imitate dialects, act out sword fights using only a stick and a scarf, and leave an entire room in tears or laughter without ever standing up. And here's your quirky bit. These metas weren't just entertainers, they were occasionally censored. If they pushed political satire too far, or mocked the wrong vizier, they might find themselves politely escorted out by the sipahi, or worse, mysteriously reassigned to quiet duties somewhere along the Anatolian plains. Historians still argue whether these stories were subversive tools of the people or simply escapism. But you know better. You know that when a room full of tired souls goes quiet to hear what happens to the clever tailor who tricks a demon into granting him 3 wishes and a chicken, that's not just escapism. That's communion. The tale wins on. There's a sultan in disguise, a girl in a tower, a horse that can talk, but only on Thursdays. Every sentence feels like an embroidered thread. Your brain stops trying to anticipate what's next. It just follows, happily, like a leaf on a stream. Eventually, the story ends. No applause. Just a deep exhale, shared unconsciously by the room, and then something you didn't expect happens. A small wooden box is brought out from behind the counter. It looks like a jewelry chest. But when the lid opens, you realize what it contains: inkpots, styluses, tiny carved stamps, and parchment. It's the beginning of the day's calligraphy club. That's right. Coffee houses weren't only places to listen and speak. They were often makeshift scriptoria. If you had steady hands, good light, and an idea, you could practice the sacred art of writing. Arabic script was more than language. It was architecture. Curved domes, elongated spires, the swirl of a dervish's cloak all echoed in the form of a single elegant letter. Writing was considered visual prayer. And here, amid the stale smoke and leftover dice, someone is carefully copying a line of HAFIZ. You watch as the ink glides across the page. It's not just beautiful, it's alive. The letters breathe, slant, stretch. It's like watching someone coax poetry out of smoke. One young woman is working on a decorative border. Not for a religious text, not this time. It's a menu. A coffee house. Menu, inked like a royal decree. She explains with mild pride that she's designing each drink like a chapter title in an epic saga. See here, she says, pointing to one flourish. This says, the dark mirror of the night. It's just cardamom coffee. You smile. Of course, it is back in the corner. Another guest slightly tipsy on sleep deprivation has decided to compose a moral fable. His protagonist is a lazy rooster who joins a chess club. It's surprisingly moving. And the calligraphy instructor? He's not correcting anyone, just offering occasional praise and gently handing out fresh paper, like a florist distributing petals. Historians still debate whether coffee houses functioned more like modern cafes or medieval salons. But clearly, they were both. Here was a place to speak, and here, surprisingly, a place to write. It's ironic, isn't it? The same empire that kept tight control over printing presses allowed its citizens to copy, doodle, argue, and create freely in public over steaming cups of kava. You stretch your fingers. Your thoughts flicker like candlelight. You wonder, briefly, if maybe you've got a fable in you too. Or maybe a short poem. Just something about the sound the dice made. Or the philosopher's riddle. Or that cup of cardamom coffee that looked into your soul. The sky outside has shifted from slate to rose. The air smells different, now less spiced, more hopeful. Bread is baking somewhere nearby. You can hear a cartwheel creak down a cobbled street. And though you haven't moved much, your whole inner world feels rearranged, slower, softer, like someone refolded all your anxieties and placed them neatly in a drawer. The coffee house has given you a night, but also a kind of reset. And as your eyes blur a little with the candle smoke and sun, you realize something else. You're ready to go back into the world. You barely notice when the storyteller packs up his props, or when the calligraphy tools are wiped and stored back in their box. The transition from night to morning is so subtle, it might be magic or just the work of the coffeehouse's rhythm. A living tide that knows exactly when to pull in and when to recede. You shift your weight. The pillow under your hip has gone flat. Someone nearby stifles a yawn, so big you feel it in your own jaw. But you're still here. You're still listening. Now, the old chess table is being cleared. Not because the game is over, but because it has transformed. Where once pawns marched across black and white squares in battle, now painted tokens and carved markers begin to appear. The game they are laying out is not chess, nor backgammon, nor cards. It's mangala, traditional Ottoman variant of the mangala-style games. And you're about to witness a match that has probably been in session since before your second coffee. Is your mainstream historical fact. Mangala was one of the oldest and most widespread board games played in the Ottoman Empire, documented as early as the 16th century. Ottoman soldiers carried it. Scholars played it to pass time between lectures. Even palace officials were known to enjoy a sneaky round during long council meetings. The game board is a long wooden slab with scooped-out hollows lined in 2 rows. Small stones or seeds are used as counters. It's a game of capture, of anticipation, of patient strategy, and it has no dice, no element of chance. Victory lies in rhythm, observation, and call, which is to say, Mangala is the anti-caffeine game. It's a curious contrast, really. While the brain buzzes from thick cove, the hands move slowly, meditatively, as though the players are needing time itself. A man and woman sit opposite one another. Neither blinks much. Their fingers move with ritualistic precision, dropping counters into each hollow like they're sowing wishes. Around them, a few half-asleep spectators blink lazily, hypnotized by the repetitive clink of stone on wood. And here's your quirky fringe. Tidbit. Mangala wasn't just a game, it was sometimes a test. Prospective bureaucrats and administrators were occasionally judged on their ability to win or strategize in these games, a soft signal of their foresight, patience, and ability to read others without being rash. Rumor had it that one Ottoman vizier was fired not for losing, but for gloating too much when he won. Historians still argue whether Mangala was taken truly seriously as a cultural marker or just enjoyed as a pastime. But in a world where silence could be dangerous and loud opinions had consequences, a game that lets you express yourself with your fingers held a quiet kind of power. You lean in a little closer. One of the players is running low on seeds. The other seems to be setting up. A long capture, the kind that folds back into itself. You don't know the rules, but you know drama when you see it. They lock eyes for a second, just a heartbeat, and then the move is made. A cascade of captures. It's elegant. It's brutal. It's beautiful. No cheers. Just a subtle nod. The game resets. They're going to play again. Meanwhile, at a table nearby, a younger crowd is fiddling with something different dice and folded slips of parchment. This isn't gambling. It's roleplay. That's right. Ottoman coffeehouses occasionally hosted what were, for all intents and purposes, proto-improv games. Imagine a group of merchants pretending to be pirates. A pair of scholars acting out. A legal dispute with increasingly absurd laws. One corner of the room breaks into laughter, not because of a punchline, but because someone's impression of a camel is so spot on, it startles a cat. And here you are, still watching, still soaking it in. The games never stop. They just shift forms. Someone walks by with a tray of pastry simit, dusted with sesame, and still warm. Your stomach murmurs in a language older than Ottoman Turkish. The coffeehouse keeper gives you a tired smile, the kind that says we've both survived the night. He places a glass of water beside your elbow. It tastes like snow melting on marble. You're starting to lose track of time again. Not in the dangerous way, but in the way. That means your mind has stopped racing. You've entered the hum of the day's beginning. Wrapped in the lull of clinking stones and rising steam, Dot, you wonder who else will come through these doors soon. A scholar with a grievance to air? A traveling poet with a broken sandal and 1,000 stories? Or maybe someone like you, just a wanderer looking for a soft corner to rest in and a game to get lost inside. The woman from the mangala match gets up, stretches, and bows slightly to the man. They exchange no words. Only the game passed between them. That's enough. Somewhere in the distance, a mosque's minaret sings the first call of true morning. Not quite the dawn prayer, but not far from it. And though you've been up all night, you feel something like peace. The kind that comes not from stillness, but from immersion. You've been in it, part of it, not just watching from the edges. A hand offers you a stone from the mangala board. You take it. It's smooth, cool, heavier than it looks. You don't ask what it means. You already know Dot in this coffee house. Every object is a story. Every game is a confession. And every long night leads into a longer memory. You tuck the smooth mangala stone into your palm and rise slowly, limbs slightly stiff from sitting too long in a warm room filled with stories and steam. Outside, the horizon is beginning to stretch into a soft palette of dusty pink and gold. But inside this coffee house, the atmosphere hasn't shifted much, just deepened. The games haven't stopped, only faded to quieter rounds. One man sits cross-legged on the floor, playing a game that looks like backgammon, but isn't. The board's markings are older, stranger chalk lines on a slab of flat stone. His opponent is a boy barely 10, but sharp-eyed and unflinching. Crouched beside them, curious Dot, it's a local variant known in this district as Khan's Karki, or Wheel of Chance. A hybrid between dice rolling and riddle solving. Each roll triggers a puzzle. Each puzzle determines the strength of your move. A clever mechanic designed to favor wit over luck. Naturally, the child is winning. This section's historical fact might surprise you. Ottoman coffeehouses were not just for adult men. In certain towns and regions, especially toward the later centuries, teenagers and even children would be welcome during daylight hours or under the watch of older relatives. Coffeehouses were educational ecosystems, incubating young minds not only with books and debates, but also with games designed to build logic, memory, and storytelling. And it wasn't all strategy and seriousness. Remember those proto-improv performances? They'd often include riddles, tongue twisters, or absurdist arguments for entertainment. Think who's on first, but in Ottoman Turkish and involving goats, taxes, or your neighbor's suspiciously luxurious shoes. Some coffeehouses would host fikra contests essentially. Who could tell the funniest, wittiest anecdote? Winner often received a free coffee or a bite of lokum, Turkish delight. But more important than the prize was the prestige. Being the coffeehouse's unofficial clown laureate was a real thing. Here's your quirky tidbit. One noted 18th century satirist, known only by his pen name Karagözkü, was said to have been discovered during one of these local joke competitions. He went on to create puppet shows that satirized politics so sharply he was exiled, then pardoned twice. Historians still argue whether Karag's and Hasavat Turkey's iconic shadow puppets originated solely from folk tradition or were influenced by these coffeehouse jesters. Either way, the echoes are there. The blend of wit, critique, and comedy performed with minimal props and maximum charisma. The boy wins again. The man sighs, ruffles the child's hair, and surrenders a copper coin. The boy doesn't gloat. He's clearly a regular here part of the tapestry. Just another thread in the long braid of community and memory. Dot at the next table. Someone mutters under their breath, counting prayer beads as they draw symbols on a slate. You realize they're sketching out a tabir chart in Old Ottoman, practice of dream interpretation. 1 foot in superstition, 1 in soft science. Dream reading wasn't just done in private. In coffee houses, especially in the twilight hours, someone might recite a dream they had and ask the room for insights. An older man might declare, "A lion in a dream means leadership." A younger one might say, "No, it means danger." A poet might offer, "It means you need a new mattress." It's oddly communal. Dreams as puzzles, dreams as confession. And sometimes, those dreams became the seed for a game. A man dreams he was a sultan's dog. The next night, a group stages a riddle match. If a sultan's dog dreams he is the sultan, who wakes whom? Not all coffee houses indulge such whimsy, but this one seems to. You sip the last of your now cold coffee, thick with grounds. At the bottom of the cup, the residue curls into strange patterns. A woman nearby peers over, leans in, and smirks. She flips the cup upside down on its saucer, lets it sit for a few heartbeats, then lifts it and reads your fortune. You will travel. Far, she says, not in miles, but in memory. You will leave places before they're finished with you. You will carry fragments. You will return, always change dot. It's unclear if she means metaphorically, or if she's just messing with you. Doesn't matter. You look around and realize something strange. No one seems tired. They look used, worn by the hours. Yes, but not fatigued, not drained. There's a special kind of energy that comes from making it through the whole night with strangers who start to feel like old companions. Not by speaking necessarily, but by simply being part of the same warm, breathing story. One final detail catches your eye. In the corner, an old display case lined with velvet. Inside, relics. Dice worn smooth, a chipped porcelain cup, a folded scorecard in faded ink. These are not for sale, not even for touching. They are memories on pause. Artifacts of laughter, defeat, bluffing, winning, and starting over. You're hit by a sudden wave of calm, the kind that feels earned. Maybe it's because the games have slowed, or maybe because the sun is finally brushing its gold fingers through the window slats. You've survived the Ottoman night shift. You've outlasted the riddles, the dice, the mangala marathons. And now, like everyone else here, you've begun to soften into the morning. A soft bell chimes at the door. Someone new enters. Someone else stirs, stretches, and heads out. The wheel turns dot, and now, just maybe, you're ready for one last game. Or maybe a nap. You lean back, letting the scent of roasted beans and smoldering coal mingle one last time in your lungs. The warmth of the coffee house has mellowed into something almost medicinal, thick air and soft laughter settling like a blanket over the tiled floor. You're not the only one lingering. A few others, silent and wide-eyed, still cradle cups they stopped drinking hours ago, dot outside. The morning begins to assert itself. You can hear it in the shifting pitch of street sounds vendors. Arranging trays, birds clearing their throats, distant prayer calls cresting the skyline. Inside, though, time remains stubborn, refusing to follow. One final pocket of the night is still tucked here between chessboards and copper cups. You're drawn toward a final table, half curious. There, 3 older men sit in silence around. A strange game, a curious mix of dominoes and poetry. You recognize the dominoes, thick and dulled, but each has a line of verse etched into the back in careful Ottoman script dot. It's called Bayat Tasi, couplet stones. You play it like dominoes, but you earn points by connecting lines of poetry that create rhymed or meaningful stanzas. Sometimes the lines clash, and the group bursts into groans or chuckles. Sometimes they resonate, and one player murmurs, "That, one dot 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 that one stays." This is the final game of the night. A slow, reflective match that bridges intellect and emotion. It isn't about winning. It's about weaving, word by word, a tapestry of thoughts that feels true. Here's a curious historical fact. Ottoman poets were deeply revered, and some even formed guilds that operated like musical bands or academic fraternities. They'd compose verses on the spot, duel in metaphors, or complete each other's lines. Some coffeehouses held poetry duels, as often as chess tournaments. The fringe tidbit? There are records of poetry so influential in these games that entire rounds would halt just to appreciate the stanza. One 17th century player was so good at poetry dominoes that patrons chipped in to buy him a new turban as a prize. That turban, reportedly, was far too large and slid over his eyes, but he wore it anyway, a symbol of his accidental fame. Historians still argue whether this final type of game was widespread or a localized phenomenon. Some insist Beyit Tasi was only ever played in literary enclaves of Istanbul, while others cite traveler journals that describe similar games in Aleppo, Damascus, even Sarajevo. As always, history leaves us riddles. The old men don't speak often, but when they do, it's in slow phrases, carefully chosen. One line lands so gently that you feel it reverberate in your chest. The night grew long, and still you did not turn. Away, no one responds. They just nod dot, and just like that, the game dissolves. No announcement, no final score. The players lean back, content with the thread they've spun. You realize the goal was never to win, it was to listen. Around the room, small rituals of departure begin. Someone relights the stove to brew fresh coffee. But this round isn't for games. It's for the workers outside, the shopkeepers just opening their stalls. A young man passes by and thanks the host with a bow so slight it's almost invisible. And you, well, you finally rise. Your limbs are soft now, not from sleep, but from hours of gentle tension and release, like a long stretch. You feel changed. Somehow, not dramatically, just finely tuned. Before you leave, one last glance around. The mangala board is empty now. The dice are resting. The poem stones are tucked away. But the echoes remain dot in these hours. Between dark and dawn, you've been part of something that stretches centuries. Something resilient, quiet, joyful. The Ottoman Coffeehouse wasn't just a place for sipping and sitting. It was a theater, a library, a playground, a court, a sanctuary. A classroom dot, it was a soft rebellion against loneliness. A shared space where minds could wander and words could land. And somehow, through riddles and jokes, through dominoes and debates, it still hums with that same energy dot. You step into the morning light, blinking that no one tells you goodbye. No one needs. 2. The games are always waiting. All you have to do is come back. Word count, 1065, when down, 300 words. You're walking now, slow and steady, as the city around you begins to stretch and yawn awake. The air is cooler, gentler, the last shadows of night slipping away behind you. Your steps feel deliberate, softened by everything you've absorbed, the murmur of voices, the rhythm of hands moving across ancient game boards, the laughter that curled upward like steam. Each sound still rings softly in your ear, but like a lullaby fading after the last note. You pass a shop window and catch your own reflection. It's still you, of course, but maybe with a little more stillness behind the eyes. A little more patience. The kind of stillness that only comes from sitting among strangers and knowing you are welcome, without needing to speak. The kind of stillness built from stories that don't need to end, only pause. And as the city stirs and stretches, you let your breath slow. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes grow heavy. Whatever pace the world returns to now, you don't have to match it just yet. You've earned the quiet. Let the coffeehouse stay with you, just for a little longer. Let its warmth curl under. Your skin like the last sip from a porcelain cup. You're safe here. You're held. Let the morning pass you by. You've got time.